Welcome to a Legendarium Christmas special about the story of Santa Claus. We will talk about Santa's beginnings as a bishop named Saint Nicholas of Myra. As the story of Nicholas spread across Europe, he was reinvented as Sinterklaas within the Netherlands. When the Dutch began migrating to North America in the 1600s, their descendants reinvented Sinterklaas yet again as Santa Claus. The story of Santa began with St. Nicholas of Myra, who was born around the year 270 AD. During his time as the Bishop of Myra, located in modern-day Turkey, Nicholas became renowned for his generosity to the poor. For example, he personally paid for the dowries of 3 girls from an impoverished family so that their father wouldn't be forced to sell them into slavery. He also gave gold coins to small children across his diocese, and according to one tale, he was said to have resurrected 3 boys who were murdered, butchered, and then pickled by an evil butcher who intended to sell them as hams. And obviously St. Nicholas would not allow such a wicked scheme to proceed. At a time when many people suffered from poverty and dislocation because of the recent crisis of the 3rd century, St. Nicholas, as a champion of the poor, became widely beloved, and his story spread across Europe. However, as the story of Nicholas spread into pagan countries, he began to pick up the features of pagan gods. Most likely, he got his long white beard from Odin, who was also said to have rode in a sledge pulled by an 8-legged dog, which would later, of course, become 8 tiny reindeer once it was St. Nicholas holding the reins. Given that St. Nicholas appeared in many different countries, it's not surprising that he took many different forms. In Russia, for example, he was portrayed as a stern Orthodox bishop who punished wicked children, sometimes with blizzards. But in the Netherlands, he became the kindly old Sinterklaas, who dressed as a Catholic bishop, had a long white beard likely inherited from Odin, and children across the Netherlands would leave their shoes out on Christmas Eve. Sinterklaas would then fill them with chocolates and candies and small toys. However, in a decidedly brutal twist, Sinterklaas had some assistants who would throw naughty children into a sack and then take them to Spain to be sold as slaves. This brutal detail was likely added when the Dutch were ruled by the Spanish. During the 1500s, a great breach opened up between the Dutch and their Spanish overlords when the Dutch converted to Protestantism while the Spaniards remained devoutly Catholic. In large part because of this, the Dutch waged a war of independence against Spain 200 years before the American Revolution. While the Dutch cherished their independence and their Protestant Christianity, they remained fond of a certain old Catholic bishop named Sinterklaas, who remained a fixture of the Dutch Christmas. And in the 1600s, when Dutch migrants began making their way to North America, they brought Sinterklaas with them. Unfortunately, the Dutch colony in North America, New Netherlands, was soon conquered by the English and became New York. Yet the story of Sinterklaas survived, though he was anglicized into Santa Claus. The story of Sinterklaas and later Santa Claus was likely told around family fireplaces for generations before the word Santa Claus finally made their way into a New York newspaper in the year 1773. Yet in 1809, Santa went down his first chimney. The man to introduce this part of the Santa Claus story was none other than Washington Irving, the author of Sleepy Hollow and Rip Van Winkle. In this novel, A History of New York, Mr. Irving described Santa as being a lanky Catholic bishop. Obviously, in later incarnations, he would put on quite a bit of weight. Much of our modern idea of Santa Claus comes from Clement Moore's poem, "'Twas the Night Before Christmas." This 56-line poem was first published in 1822 in the Troy Sentinel. It gave Santa his 8 tiny reindeer and introduced the idea of him flying around the skies and delivering toys to all of the good boys and girls just in time for Christmas. Given that New York even then was a media center for the rest of the United States, it didn't take long for the story of Santa to spread across North America. Santa began appearing in stories and Christmas cards, most famously appearing as the Ghost of Christmas Present in Charles Dickens' legendary classic, A Christmas Carol. Curiously, Santa remained a bachelor until an 1849 story introduced Mrs. Claus. While Santa was portrayed as wearing green, purple, blue, and brown robes, red became firmly established around the late 1800s, and in 1890, a man named James Edgar introduced a holiday staple with the department store Santa. Mr. Edgar ran a dry goods store in Brockton, Massachusetts, and hit upon the idea of having one of his employees dress up as Santa so that boys and girls could sit on his lap and tell him what they wanted for Christmas. The marketing idea worked like a charm, and children from miles around dragged their parents to Mr. Edgar's dry goods store to visit Santa. And it wasn't long before much larger department stores in small towns and big cities alike introduced the department store Santa, and he became a permanent fixture of Christmas in the United States. That wraps things up for this episode of The Legendarium. I hope you enjoyed it. If you did, press like. If you want to see more, press subscribe. And if you've got anything to say, let me know in the comments section. Thanks again for joining me, and I hope you have a great rest of the day.